Moving on to the next slide, we're getting into PAAL, into our major stem and the conjugations, because at this point we're looking at the conjugations per se. We want to learn them, and every one of these conjugations, and you see here conjugation and the arrow that gives us those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 2 more which are not in the slide but which are volitional conjugation, or you could say, well, they do have an extra form, each one of them, or they can have similar form to the imperfect, but you still will need to say cohortative or gessive. It's not there, but remember there is also such possibility, cohortative and gessive, except for those that you see on the slide. And there is an extra way also of saying imperfect plus vav consecutive, or vav conversive, or perfect plus vav consecutive and vav conversive. Do not ever forget that the vav conversive or vav consecutive will change the whole idea, and it's not an imperfect then anymore, but which means it's gonna change the meaning, right? Imperfect will usually give you the future. Perfect will usually give you past tense, depending on the context. Remember, the context is king in the Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew. Parsing will determine half of the meaning anyways, and so do not forget that perfect with vav consecutive is going to bring a very different translation, and imperfect with vav consecutive will do the same thing. So we would say we have of the conjugations 1, 2, 3 imperative, infinitive constructus, infinitive absolutus, participle, cohortative, gessive, and the 2 perfect and imperfect with vav consecutives, which gives us 10 conjugations, 10 possible conjugations. And let's say it in every stem, but we will start talking about them looking at the kal or PAAL stem, because this will give us clear understanding of the conjugations, and this understanding will be repeated in every step. Talking about the conjugations, we talk about perfect, saying this is a past tense, okay? I know many people don't want to say that, many textbooks do not want to say. Anyway, so perfect gives us past, and I'm just gonna stick with that, okay? Past, a simple past tense or completed action if you want, whatever you prefer, but generally that's my understanding. Imperfect is going to give us most of the times future, and it's what is behind this form, even though it's called such a funny name. The future action is not a completed action just yet. It is called imperfect. Well, imperative is going to give us a volitional urge to do something, urging someone to do something. And then infinitive constructus, infinitive absolutus. Remember, there are 2 infinitives in biblical Hebrew, and the participles, active participles and passive participles, as long as we are in the kal stem or PAAL stem. But now we want to look at each one of them, and we'll start with perfect, and we'll talk about the first form, that here is a third person masculine singular. This, by the way, is our PGN column, okay? This gives us person, gender, and number. So third person masculine singular is he, right? He, we talk about him, we said there are 3 persons, and third person is always talking about someone. He, singular, feminine, singular, she. Right? So this way, when I write the pronouns here on next to the PGN description, let's look at the second person masculine singular, you. It's talking to a man. Remember, second person is always talking to someone, eyes to eyes, face to face. And the second person masculine singular is when you talk to a man. Okay, when somebody talks to a man. As second person feminine singular, it's you, but talking to a woman. First person masculine or feminine singular, because singular really only has 1 form, and it's going to be talking about me. First person gives us talking about myself or us, and in the singular form it's talking about me, so I, and it doesn't matter if I'm a man or a woman for Hebrew. Now we get into plural, and we get 2 forms here. Third person masculine plural, it's a group of men or it's a mixed group, they. Both of those groups will have masculine form in Hebrew. Third person feminine plural, it's they, but we're talking about women. women or things, okay, that are feminine. Torot, okay, they are teachings. They, still feminine plural, so they were talking about them, will need to be using the form that correlates to this to this idea of feminine group of feminine people or beings or things. Second person, we're getting into second person, back to talking to someone eyes to eyes, face to face. We're talking to a group of people, masculine plural. Y'all, well, I'm using the Texas way of addressing a group of people just to be sure that I'm not using the same you that will have different meanings in Hebrew, and we want to determine it as close as possible. There is no way for me to say you all talking to men in a different way in English than you all talking to women, right? It will be the same word, but there is a difference in Hebrew. So whenever we talk to a group of men or to a mixed group, we're going to use a masculine form that will have a masculine ending in Hebrew. But second person, feminine plural, whenever we're going to be talking to women, to a group of women, we'll have to use this special form with a special feminine ending. And the first person, masculine or feminine, plural, we're talking about us. We. Us. Doesn't matter if it's masculine or feminine, we do not differentiate those in Hebrew in the first person. So the first person in Hebrew will not give us the gender of a person talking or of a group, which also makes sense because this information is obvious from the context. Remember, the third person in Hebrew is always starting with a hey. Second person is always starting with an aleph and tav, at, ata, at, atem, aten, atena. And then the first person is always started with an aleph and nun, ani, anochi, anachnu. Shorter form of this, anachnu, like anu or nachnu. Well, anu will still have aleph and nun, but nachnu. So here we would have who, he, she, ata to a man, you, at to a woman, you, ani, anochi, I, hem, they, masculine, hen, henna, hemma, by the way, is also a possibility. They, hen, henna, they, feminine. Atem, masculine form. Aten, atena, feminine form. And anachnu for plural form, first person. First person plural. We actually have these very pronounced, but in Hebrew right next to the forms. This is going to be super helpful for the perfect forms, just to be able to memorize them. So we'll start with the who, and who katav, he katva. And I know it actually should be probably on that side, but you know what? It doesn't matter because it will correlate to whatever form else is going to be appearing on this in these conjugations, and we'll talk about them more. And we will move the pronouns whenever we need them into the proper spot. Now, it's actually a good thing that they are on the left because as you can see these forms, each one of them except for this one, katvu, goes for hem or hen, whichever. But each other form actually has just one possibility. It only can go with who, right? So katav does not actually need a pronoun next to it whenever we do read it in the text. It doesn't have to have a subject next to it if there is a subject and in the sentence, or it's clear from the previous sentence, it's clear who is doing the work, who was doing the work. So katav is always a but. It helps to know the pronouns on the one hand, and it also helps to see the endings and the forms, to learn the forms in the perfect if you know the Hebrew pronouns. So hu katav, he katva, and that was third person with a hey always, but then when we talk to somebody, we always say katavta, ata katavta. It rhymes, at katavt. To a woman, we'll say kataft, you wrote or you have written. And to a man, we'll say katafta, Ata katafta, and sometimes there will be a pronoun used next to the verb form, and that means that the pronoun is stressed then, because the verbal form in itself does not actually need a pronoun. Ata katafta, at kataft, ani, talking about myself, katafti. I wrote, ani katafti. And see, ani katafti, it rhymes. And then hem and hen, they and they, men and they, mixed group and they, women. Katvu, and then atem, back to talking to people, to groups of people. We're saying atem katavtem, aten katavten, anachnu katavnu. We wrote, anachnu katavnu. Again, you hear the rhyme. The rhyme is a super helpful to learning, memorizing. But all of them in the perfect, if you see, they start with the verb root. See, it's the same verbal, it's the same letter. Katav, katva, katavta, kataft, katavti, katvu, katavtem, katavten, katavnu. And the only two possibilities with the shva under the first root letter are these in the second person, masculine and feminine, plural, katavtem, katavten. So all that is happening in the perfect tense, or let's say perfect conjugation. Remember, the conjugations are perfect, imperfect, imperative, infinitive constructives, infinitive absolutus, participle, cohortative or adjussive, next to imperative as volitional conjugations, and perfect plus verb consecutive and perfect plus verb consecutive. On this slide, we are seeing the same forms that we have just talked about, but it's obvious that we have a separation between the stem and the ending, or suffixes or suffirmatives. There are different ways to call these last syllables added to the verb. Now, on the left, we see in blue, we see the stems, and I'm calling them this way because the stems consist usually of the root plus vowels, right? So this way, we can also go over them and see katav, 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 katav. No ending. Yay, I found the lexical form. This is our third person masculine singular, right? And then let's finish looking at the stems. Katv, little bit different, right? The vowels are a little bit different. Katav, katav, ktav, ktav, katv. Okay, now it's explainable. I'm not going to go into the detail why, or maybe I'll just say it whenever there is the last syllables that is being added is just a vowel, and look at this katvu, right? Katva, even though there is a hey at the end, it's silent, and that's pretty much it. Only these two forms are going to have shva instead of a ptach. But plus minus, it's really most of them have the same vowels. Definitely kamats under the first, almost everywhere except for these two forms, ktavtem, ktavten. Again, we can talk about this. Why is there the reduction of the syllable? It's all explainable. But this slide is really helpful for you just to look at this and say, okay, so the perfect conjugation will always have the endings, or suffirmatives, or suffixes, whichever you call them, the endings. And the other thing that is beautiful and wonderful about that, when you have learned all these endings, they're easy if you're learning them with the pronouns, and I'll talk about it in a minute. But if you've learned them, same endings will reappear in every other stem. They will be present actually in every stem, just plain in major stems as well as in minor stems that we're even not going to talk about, but you will see them, those minor stems also in the text, right? Because language is language, you'll see them. But there might be difficulties with the roots. We'll come to talk about that, right? Not with this root, because this root is strong, it has all strong letters, but all the endings cannot disappear in any case, so they will have to be everywhere. And if you have learned them, it's going to be easier for you to recognize them and to parse the verb right away. By the ending, I can say right away, this is third person plural, masculine plural, third person masculine plural, because I know the ending. And now I just said it's easy to learn them if you are learning them, memorizing them with the pronoun. And let's go over them again and say ani katavti, אתה כתבת, את כתבת. See how it correlates? Well, הוא כתב, okay. היא כתבה, he is she, right? He is always כתבה. No, with an I at the end. With an extra hey at the end. Look at this. אנחנו כתבנו, אתם כתבתם, אתן כתבתן, הם כתבו. Or הן כתבו. Now, it's not a problem that we are seeing these forms starting with the first person, not the third person, right? Because, honestly, there will never be a moment when you'll see a number of paradigms in the text, right? They will not come up in lists in the text. We need to be able to recognize them, so learn them. And a great way of learning it, I'm not going to give you everything that I do with my students, but something that is the key for learning them is to just read them a lot of times. You will easily remember them. כתב, כתבה, כתבת, כתבת, כתבתי, כתבו, כתבתם, כתבתן, כתבנו. And it is really helpful to read them with the pronoun. So in this case, I would read pronoun and the verb. הוא כתב, היא כתבה, אתה כתבת, את כתבת, אני כתבתי, הם כתבו, הן כתבו, אתם כתבתם, אתן כתבתן, אנחנו כתבנו. Now, I do not have all of the pronouns here. If you want to change it, to rewrite it, make it your own table, add the extra pronouns that we usually would be used in the Bible, like the old form of ani, the anochi, or hema, henna, atem, aten, atena as a possibility again, and anachnu as the form says, nachnu and anu. But, if you want to do it, to add it, you're most welcome to do it. But these forms that I have here, they are used the most. They are used in modern Hebrew all the time. And they will be, they do have this rhyming part in the end. This way you are learning both the pronouns and the verbal forms at the same time. When you are reading them, make sure that you really understand the translation. So maybe it would be nice to just translate them right away. Hu katav. He wrote. He katva. She wrote. Ata katavta. You wrote. At kataft. You wrote to a woman. Ani katavti. I wrote. Hem katvu. Hen katvu. They wrote. They wrote. Atem katavtem. You all wrote. And aten katavten. You all talking to women. Wrote or have written. אנחנו כתבנו, we wrote, and then do the same thing without the pronouns and just say כתב, he wrote, כתבה, she wrote, כתבת, you wrote, כתבת, you wrote, a woman, כתבתי, I wrote, כתבו, they wrote, כתבתם, כתבתן, כתבנו. Now, as if we were learning modern Hebrew, this is the same information, except in the modern Hebrew, for example, you would not have this כתבתם, so it wouldn't be stressed by, but in the biblical Hebrew, usually the tem and ten, these two endings are stressed. But you still do look at all the temim appearing in the text to make sure that in this case, in this posal form, maybe it does not look somehow different.